Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you all really enjoyed this evening's panel discussion and that you're able to take something really positive away from what we hear tonight and learn tonight. My name is Hannah Lowe and I'm an intern here at the Dialogue Society, and I'll be hosting tonight's panel discussion on fostering inclusive workplaces. And the Dialogue Society is hosting a panel series on racial equality over the next few months, with the aim of highlighting the multifaceted and layered dimensions of racism and how this can negatively impact society. Moving from individual experiences to the impact of racism has more broadly in our workplaces, politics, and culture. This panel series aims to focus on positive approaches that work towards the goal of racial equality. And each panel focuses on a particular theme, and today's panel discussion on fostering inclusive workplaces aims to explore the definition of an inclusive workplace and how best we can fully develop them across different sectors and the implications for growth and innovation that an inclusive working environment brings. So while today's panel discussion focuses on race and racism within the workplace, we are very aware that inclusivity directly relates to and is dependent on many different important aspects of identity. And there is much more that needs to be discussed when we talk about inclusivity, such as gender and sexual orientation. And this is all part of the conversation around inclusivity. However, today's discussion might place a focus on the relationship between race and inclusivity within the workplace, just as part of this series. So to let everybody know about the following panel discussions in this series, on the 24th of June, we will be holding a discussion on personal narratives of racism from South Africa, UK and USA. And then on the 15th of July, we will hold a discussion on the implications of racism on mental health. So just a few housekeeping things before I introduce our speakers. If everybody could keep themselves muted unless they're speaking, that would be great. And viewers, please feel free to ask questions in the chat box or in the comments on YouTube, and we will try and make time for a few questions at the end. So our first speaker today will be Professor Heidi Safia Mirza, who is an Emeritus Professor in Equality Studies at UCL, Institution of Education. She is also Professional Research Fellow of Race, Faith and Culture at Goldsmiths College of London, University of London, and now enjoys the position of Visiting Professor in Social Policy at LSE. Next, we will hear from Dr. Zaza Johnson Elsheikh, who is the Chair of the Counter-Terrorism Advisory Group, panel member at Commercial and Medical Dispute Solutions, and the founder of both the organisation Converge and Belief in Mediation and Arbitration. Then we will be hearing from Jeevantika Lingalwar, who is the Partner Technology Strategist for Microsoft, a technical manager and co-founder of Quantum Computing Ireland, and founder and president of International Women in Tech Ireland, and founder of India Ireland Connect. And so following Jeevantika, we will hear from Celina Mfuko, who is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager for East and North Hertfordshire NHS Trust and Diversity and Inclusion Manager at ENH Tech, whilst also being Research Manager at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. And then lastly, we'll be hearing from Trisha Webbe, who is the Assistant Director for East and North Hertfordshire NHS Trust. So without further ado, I would like to pass on to our first esteemed speaker of the night, Professor Heidi Safia Mirza.
So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my presentation? No?
Not yet. Can't see it yet.
No, something's wrong. I don't know why it's not coming up. I'll try one more. Can you put it up for me, please? Thank you.
Got it.
Right. So I'm going to talk today about respecting difference and looking at race, faith and inclusion, but I'm particularly looking at higher education as that is an area in which I've been working in. But the focus today is on fostering workplace inclusion. So can you go to my first slide, please? The next slide. Can you go to the next slide, please? Hello? Thank you. So I want to talk about the wider context. I don't think we can foster workplace inclusion without starting at the very beginning, which is looking at the context in which diversity and inclusion is unfolding at the moment. We've just had, where we're in this, what is called now a post-race moment. We've had Black Lives Matter, we're now got Brexit. We also have the underlying pandemic, which is reshaping our world and the way we see race and difference. And I have called this slide post-race eduscapes because we are told that we live in this post-race moment. We've had over 60 years of equality legislation, not just in the civil rights movement, but also here in the UK and across Europe. And we have some of the most sophisticated legislation to prevent discrimination in the workplace. And yet it has not been enacted. It's what my colleague Sarah Ahmed has called a performativity. We perform race equality in our institutions. We have committees and we discuss it, but very little changes in terms of the actual inclusion, in terms of representation and progression through our systems. Here you can see some students with the IM2 Oxford and the student movement for a diverse curriculum. And so while on one hand, we have all this legislation, on the other hand, we also have what we can see as a huge backlash against equal opportunities and the idea that there should be more inclusive practices in our workplace. And it's very much around the idea that, that these policies are special pleading. They give you a leg up and a leg in into a position, and it's seen as that you should be there on merit, you should be there on talent, but somehow if you're Black or if you're brown skin, you will suddenly have a job. And that happened to me when I became a professor. You know, several white male professors said, Heidi, you're not that good really. You only are getting this chair, this position as a professor because you're the right person, i.e. a woman, the right color, at the right time. It was in the 90s when we were talking a lot about diversity as well. And, you know, so it was seen as a special thing. And it's a burden that people of color have to always bear when they're in the workplace, because it is the idea that somehow you are not there on merit. You are there because of special pleading, because of the gift that the white institutions have bestowed upon you. So it is something. Next slide, please. So I want to drill down into some research that I looked at around recruitment, progression and retention in higher education, which are I think the three important phases when we're thinking about how we foster inclusion in our institutions, whether it's a workplace or an educational establishment. And the idea of recruitment, well, and the outsider within in terms of our institutions is really very important. So here is a piece of research that I did looking at teachers, young people who are training to be teachers, trying to get into higher education, therefore, and then work in schools and in universities. And Ken was a young Caribbean man, and he was advised not to apply for high status universities because, as the tutor told him in his college, African students will have difficulty getting in. And this is about very much the reputational position of certain institutions. It could be not only academic institutions, so, you know, high status elite institutions, or a business, say like much prized working at Facebook or Google or something like that. You're told, don't bother to try, you will never get in. And this is the idea of access and cultural capital, so that you're seen to lack the cultural capital because of the color of your skin, because of your background, your cultural differences or whatever. You're seen as not the same as a white candidate. not the same as a middle-class candidate, not the same as an able-bodied candidate or a male candidate. So this idea of lack is really another burden that you carry if you do get in. And eventually Keith, though he was told that he couldn't get in, managed to do, he did a special course on CVs and went through quite a lot, a whole year to practice, and he finally did get in. And when you do get in, I call it the journey into the heart of whiteness, the idea that you are a freshwater fish swimming in sea salt water. It is about the culture which you then have to navigate while you are there. And that difficulty is about settling in, seeing yourself as part of being in a white institution, which enables white male privilege in particular. And you have to navigate and strategize. And I've had to do this all my life as well. And I've talked to a lot of people, and they say, the way they survive is staying strongly linked to their cultures back home, to their food that they eat, to the smells of the cut grass in the hills where they have come from, in order to keep a sense of belonging and the sense of who you are in these difficult spaces, because it's like sea water and you're a fresh fish in a difficult place. Next slide, please. And this is the big conundrum that we had that I mentioned before about equality and diversity policies. We have a huge number of diversity policies and equalities legislation. And this is the case of another student who wasn't first accepted onto the course. And you could, use this also, not accepted into a job as well. Sam was a Nigerian engineer, and he wanted to become a teacher. And when he went for the interview, Dave, the tutor that was interviewing him, said it would be unfair to accept Sam because they couldn't give him the extra time to bring him up to the level that was expected. And then another tutor in the interview, said, well, there are different routes that students come in and they enrich the course. So it's good to have diversity. So this is the conundrum now that we find in fostering inclusion, is that on one side, they're seeing that, again, they have to bring you up to a particular level. You might not be good enough. And then at the other side, you enrich the course, diversity is good, it makes us more productive. And what happened with Sam is that, he was being failed as well on his course, and he was watched, and this is the notion of surveillance. So in Jim Crow and in times of when we had like apartheid, and you couldn't actually be a person of color and work in a white institution, which was only up until the 1960s and into the 1970s, actually, quite recently. And now you are let in, you are watched, because you can be different, but not too different. Next slide, please. So being different is also something that we have to navigate in the workplace. And here I want to look at race and faith and culture in the workplace, and the notion of the white savior, as I call it. But this is also about retention, how to keep and why people leave and how to keep people in. So a tutor, Kalila, was a young Muslim trainee teacher, and her tutor was also failing her. And he said that he was failing her and he was being very hard on her because, and this is what he said actually to me in the research process, Muslim women make poor teachers. They are too passive and acquiescent to teach effectively. And this was the idea that he had, that all Muslim women, all of them were unable to perform their jobs. And this was, the overdetermined dress. She was the hijab and of Muslim women, the perceptions of Muslim women, the stereotypes of Muslim women, was what he was really assessing her upon. He wasn't assessing on her ability, but the idea that all Muslim women, you know, would be like unable. So here we see a situation in which, you know, she's seen, he said he was hard on her because she needed to be taught a lesson. And we see this in bullying and workplace harassment very much. Last slide. So I just want to leave you with 3 things to think about how to foster workplace inclusion in the workplace. Firstly, we have to think about what do we mean for equality for people of color in challenging white institutions. We have very different notions. We have diversity, anti-racism, now we have decolonizing, we talk about intersectionality. We need to think about what the meaning behind those words and policies. Then we have to think about our ethics, our professional engagement. How do we arrive at the ethics, the principles that we have when we are dealing with others who are different than ourselves? And finally, we really want to think about what kind of political and cultural change we want to achieve. And by that, I mean, you know, people find it very hard to give up power. And if our institutions are based on white privilege and power, then, you know, how realistic are we about them giving up that power so that we can be on a level playing field? So I'll leave you with those thoughts, and we can have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heidi. That was really interesting. And thank you for highlighting the complexities of fostering inclusivity and navigating a majority white middle class environment, which it too often is. And so now I'm going to pass over to our next speaker, which is Dr. Zaza Johnson Elsheikh.
Hi. Just, unmuting first of all. Yes, I'll just bring up the presentation. Okay, so can you see the presentation? Can you see the slides?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Great, okay. So it was great to listen to you, Professor Heidi, so I'm looking forward to the question section later. For my part, I'm a conflict resolution specialist, and so my interaction or let's say encounter with racism within the workplace, it has been professional as well as personal. So just starting with the personal end of things, that I arrived in the UK. I was born here, but was brought up in Sudan. And I think it was highly relevant and significant for me that I was brought up in a country in Sudan where everybody was Black and that was the norm. And in fact, if anything, unfortunately, there was this pressure to convince me, although nobody ever succeeded, that I was actually superior because I was from the north of Sudan as opposed to the south of Sudan. So coming from that background to the UK, race wasn't even a thing, you know, it wasn't a point for me to really think about until I came to the UK and went to university aged 18. So I was also advised, as Professor Heidi mentioned, that, you know, there wasn't a cat's chance in hell that I would get into medical school, but there I was, and I realized that there were only 2% Black people in the first year when I arrived, and I was told by the end of the first term, when I expressed concern about my grades, this was in 1988, that my grades would continue to go down to the point that I would be asked to leave if I didn't remove my headscarf, because I couldn't change being a woman, I couldn't change being Black, but I could avoid people thinking that I was an Islamic fundamentalist. So those were the words of the dean at that time. So that was my first, serious encounter with, a difference in treatment. So the sources of my insights, as I was mentioning earlier, are previously a doctor. So as a clinician, that I definitely came across instances where there were questions asked, or there was a difference in treatment, a sort of being almost surprised, not even surprised, shocked when I knew the answer to things, or when I was doing better than colleagues. There was this sort of shock that I was doing so well, considering that I'm a Black woman in hijab, Muslim as well. And that continued when I left medicine and moved into law and was a defense litigator, so defense of NHS, private, so medical personnel of all types. So dentists, doctors, midwives, etc. And again, I came across it there where, for instance, somebody would say, at court, somebody would say, when is the solicitor coming? And I would say, I am the solicitor, So there were issues like that. And within mediation and arbitration as well, where there's been this surprise that I am the mediator, or I am the arbitrator. And just very quickly on that, just to give an anecdote of this surprise and shock even, that I received a telephone call in 2010 when somebody was due to come to a mediation the next day. And on the phone, I spoke with this gentleman, and he said to me, look, I just wanted to give you the heads up that the other side is Muslim. And I don't know how much experience you have of dealing with Muslim people, but they can be jolly slippery, so don't believe a word they say. So you'll imagine that I paused there before saying, I think I'll be all right. I've got plenty of experience of dealing with Muslim people. And there's not the time today to go into the rest of that story, but suffice to say that because of my experience in that mediation that I actually set up, I founded BEMA, Belief in Mediation and Arbitration. So origins of conflict, mismatch of expectations. Often what happens, whether you're looking at a dispute within the workplace or within a marriage, intergenerational, parents and children, often what happens is that there's a mismatch of expectations between the parties, and that leads to dislocation of communication, often silence, but it can be just shouting. That leads to disappointment, resentment, and then you have an unresolved conflict. So my role, so this is my daily mindset, being in awe of what's happening and the level of dispute around me, as I'm often a mediator, and I mentor as well some prisoners in a high-risk category. And so the contexts of the conflict are often religious, cultural, racial, and those can vary between, as I was mentioning before, a family situation, workplace, probate, so over inheritance, and indeed within the health sector. So just looking at the health sector for a moment, that I have mediated a number of cases where a Muslim family's child was dependent on a ventilator, and the decision had been taken that it wasn't in the child's best interest to continue on ventilation because there was absolutely no hope of recovery. and figuratively hand holding with the parents to make them understand that going to court wouldn't really help them, and that for a Muslim family that they should not feel guilty that they had been complicit in the murder of their child. So some quite complicated situations. And turning specifically to the workplace now, whether in health or in any other workplace, there is this difficulty with speaking. Certainly, that's a problem, speaking appropriately in the face of diversity. So, for instance, when I was a lawyer, I was told that, oh, Zaza, you're not like other Black people, you're wonderful. And that was supposed to be a compliment. And, I can almost feel you cringing to hear that. But certainly the people who said it, thought that they were complimenting me. Being at a national conference, I was going to be a speaker there. It was just maybe 5 minutes before my slot. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder and pointed out that there was a spillage on the stairs. And I'm hoping that you'll appreciate that this wasn't so that I didn't slip, because I wasn't going to be using the stairs, but it was more to, if I could please clear it up. So just taking us specifically to some verbal triggers in cases rather than my personal anecdotes. So GP receptionist, between a GP and a receptionist, this case was, where language was the trigger of conflict. And here it was that the GP, from a particular cultural background, was not really well versed in the niceties, the cultural expectations of niceties of communicating with his receptionist. And so when he wanted notes, medical notes, he would click his fingers. And the receptionist got fed up with this, and she retorted that he's a male chauvinistic pig. Now, the reason that the GP was so outraged by such a statement wasn't because he was male, because obviously he was chauvinistic culturally. He thought that was, a positive, because men should be ruling over women. It was the use of the word pig because he was Muslim. So, some time was spent on explaining why this might not have been intended to be offensive, because the statement is not male chauvinistic horse. That phrase is pig, and, seeing as he wouldn't be eating it, that no actual harm had been caused, but acknowledging absolutely that clicking of fingers is not acceptable within the UK, and it's also not acceptable to call him a pig for this GP. So moving swiftly to the university case, that this involved somebody being on a bus, unbeknown to her two colleagues who she got on very well with. She'd been working with them. She was a manager of these two individuals who were white English. She was of Asian Muslim background, and they got on famously at work, the Eid cakes and Christmas parties and so on, absolutely no problem. But one evening on the way home, she was sitting behind them, and they'd not noticed her. And it was only when she overheard them saying some pretty inflammatory Islamophobic comments that she didn't have the courage to actually go and tap them on the shoulder or confront them at that time. But she was so apprehensive about facing them and so disappointed after their good relationship that she went off sick. I was commissioned as the mediator to resolve it. And the issue for the workplace was, how do we, what are the risks of this becoming a litigation situation, because this conversation between these colleagues was actually on the bus home. It was beyond the workplace. and people are free to talk about what they want as long as it's amongst themselves and they're not aiming the comments to others. And in this case, these two colleagues said that they absolutely were not talking, intending for their manager to hear, nor were they intending to cause offense to anybody else. So perhaps we can deal with the intricacies of that case in the question and answer. Moving to the corporate space now. So prayer versus smoking breaks. So it is established policy within the UK that smoking breaks are allowed because there is a physical need for the nicotine. However, prayer can be a bit of a hit and miss provision. It depends on how well you can negotiate this within your workplace. So again, there's a disparity here because many employers will allege that there's no physical need for prayer. And so that's another issue where there is disparity, and it's about talking it through and for the employer to understand that, look, it may not seem like a physical need because it's a spiritual need, but it can have a huge impact on productivity, a negative impact on productivity if the worker is not allowed to pray. So just moving on to the last slide now, what the solutions are is to acknowledge the possibility of differences in expectation due to cultural and religious nuances, to also look at the impact currently, for instance, that we have this situation in Israel and Palestine with children at school being admonished because they've drawn a flag of Palestine, really understanding that will actually serve to be more divisive when that child is reprimanded rather than exploring and talking through their feelings, why they've drawn a flag of Palestine or anything else linked to global conflict, rather than immediately considering referring them to prevent. So, and setting up sessions to improve awareness of sensitivity. So whilst I disagree with the conclusions in the recent race report, I definitely agree with a number of the recommendations, and this is one of them. So thank you very much indeed for listening, and I'll hand back to Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zaza. Thank you for all of those really valuable and interesting examples of how racism and just a lack of understanding can lead to conflict. So I'm now going to pass over to our next speaker, which is Jeevantika Lingalwar. So Jeevantika, it's over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks. It was amazing listening to Professor Heidi and Dr. Zaza. Really thanks for the valuable insights. So I don't really have any slides or presentation in here, but it's more of sharing my thoughts around diversity and inclusion. Most of the times I don't actually get involved in the conversations where people talk about religion or color or race or anything related to some sort of political concerns. But when it is about fostering those things, there you'll find me there, because I think that's the mission I've set in my career at the moment. And I think those kind of conversations sometimes gets too nasty because of so many colors and religion talks. We all know, we have all faced the situation that religion talks mainly actually take a lot of turnarounds. But I think this is a very good conversation that we are having today about fostering inclusivity in workplace, and which is actually a wide need into the society as of today. And it's not that we are really low at the moment, but we are almost there to bring this equality within the society and the organization. Still a little bit of work needed. But my motivation behind starting International Women in Tech, so I am not actually supporting feminism here, but it's more about gender equality. I started this group so that I can help more women in technology to come together, help each other grow. So it's completely free for all, it's open for all, and it's completely I would say, different thoughts changing between my audiences. So just to keep that in mind, what I have seen is now women of color are entering the workforce in greater numbers than ever before, bringing education, ambition, and diverse ideas and experiences with them, because of which they offer corporations potent force of insight and innovation that will be increasing every day. And honestly, it is increasing at the moment, and it will also bring increasing needs to meet the need of a diverse customer base. Talking about the workplace, the presence of diverse brain power alone is not enough. It's also critical to create an open and inclusive workplace environment so that all employees feel empowered to contribute. And a company should be a place where people can bring their whole selves to work and where everyone's voice is heard. And I think, according to what I read about diversity and inclusive recently, is what did many of last year's world's best workplaces have in common? And the results were culture, that was a defining factor, and diversity and inclusion played a massive part. Everybody's talking diversity and inclusion these days, and this diversity and inclusion efforts have become a staple of any healthy businesses in more recent years. But also they require focus, expertise, and care if they want to grow and if they want to succeed. So the benefits of celebrating different cultures at a company-wide event include probably allowing colleagues to get out more, get to know each other, and helping employees to not compromise on their uniqueness at work. So I would just say, like, embrace what is unique in you, each and every, irrespective of the gender. So I recently joined Microsoft, and what I have seen is there that Microsoft are committed to making the company look like the world they want. So this is why we, like, in Microsoft, there is a requirement of 50% women at all company level. Recently, I went on a journey where we required 50% male application, 50% female application to just talk about gender equality in a high technical leadership role. And I posted out a group on LinkedIn. I posted out a post on LinkedIn and also a post on Facebook, where I got male comments on the same. This is just a small example that I recently faced on gender inequality and misinterpretation that sometimes people have. So I actually mentioned that what journey we are going through, what phase we are going through, and we want 50-50 applications of all the, regardless of race and, regardless of color. And I got all the male comments in there, all negative, saying, when did Microsoft started gender discrimination? When did Microsoft started just recruiting women? So these kind of mentality people still have out there. And I'm not saying that it's with everybody, but there are a lot of people. There are, I would say, 60% of people still out there who still believe that there is nothing as gender equality, and they still think that they do much better than a woman can do. And this is why I think the mentality of women is degrading, because society tends to reduce the confidence that they have, and they fear of standing in front of or standing amongst a bunch of men. So diversity and inclusion is actually good for a business. The customer likes to talk or deal with someone they can relate to. And everybody, I don't think just a big corporation like Microsoft or Google or Facebook should follow this, but each and every small company as well, each and every medium-sized company should also start believing in knowing it all rather than believing in learning it all rather than knowing it all. So this pretty much says for itself, and this has become a very better, and we can actually, the companies could actually foster this by becoming better in hearing and more in diverse culture, more in diverse opinions from diverse people, and bringing diversity and inclusion within the company and the organizations, and that should be valued. So the few facts that I think every leaders and every managers, every employer should incorporate within the organization Few of them is recognizing bias, practice inclusive leadership, then having sponsorship or mentors for each and every employee, hold the senior leadership accountable for the actions they are having. So when I speak about recognizing bias, it's more of, no matter how well prepared women of any color are, they won't get a seat at the table unless those at the table allow them to pull up the chair. So the companies can take immediate action, take immediate steps to make this happen. Practicing inclusive leadership, leaders needs to create a safe team environment where all employees can speak up, be heard, and feel welcome. They should embrace the input of employees whose background or expertise differ from their own, and foster collaboration amongst diverse staff, ask questions of all members of the team, give actionable feedback, and also act upon the opinions of the diverse employees. Providing mentorship, corporations, I think, such as American Express, Bank of America, have already created such program where they, not just on a monthly basis but on the yearly basis, they have sponsorship for all their employees regardless of their color or regardless of their gender or religion. Then senior leadership, they value inclusion, they put inclusion as the core of their organization, and not something that is a to do box, a to do checklist in the box. But businesses are to grow and thrive now and in the futures. It's imperative to elevate the voices of women and color, and estimate institutional barriers to their success. In order to do this, business leaders must definitely and intentionally address the relentless undertow of discrimination. We must unleash all talent, and in the process create more profit, equity, and a better world. So this is not just all about bringing in front of the society that what is gender balance, what, how we should empower women, how we should bring color equality, how we should bring like inclusivity in the workplace. But it's more about realizing how we can do this. And I am not a religious person, I am, and but it's not like I am an atheist. I am a sort of a Baha'i who believes in all religion, who believes in humanity. So my thing, and that's the reason I said that I don't usually get involved where there is a lot of talk about religion or color or thing. But I am definitely in, and definitely motivated to talk to people about fostering these things and bringing this thing not just into the workplace but also the society. With International Women in Tech, with India Island Connect, that's when I set on a journey where I set on this mission where I am on a journey to bring diversity and inclusive, to empower diversity and inclusion, not just in the workplace, not just in the society, but in the world and in the universe and wherever I can. So I believe like each and every one of us starts to believe, when starts to understand what inclusion is all about, that's when there will be an impact in this world. That's when people will start following this, and that's when people will start respecting what we are all about. So I would really conclude this with a very good and very well known motto that I had read somewhere, or I would say a phrase, that inclusion is not a matter of political correctness where people actually make it, but it is the key to growth. So, uh, incorporating inclusion in workplace, incorporating inclusion within ourselves, I would say that's when each and every one of us could grow better, could bring better out of us, and not make this a political issue. Because at the moment, inclusion is one of the reasons to bring political crisis. And that is why a lot of people, a lot of organization, I would say, have started diversity and inclusion as one of their top priority, to remove those barriers and actually bring growth in the society, actually bring growth into the world, where everybody, regardless of their gender, regardless of their experience, regardless of their color or race, could participate, act as one, and go on the same journey where they have started. So I think this is more important to me at the moment, and I think everybody's thinking about the same. So I would just say all the best to everybody who have set on this journey for diversity and inclusion. And I think one day there will be a change in the world. So thank you so much, Hannah, for this. And apologies, I won't be able to stay over 7 because I really have a hard stop at 7. But it was really amazing to be here and listening to all the amazing ladies out there, so talented and really impressive. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jeevantika. It's just so great to hear from your experience in the technology industry, and thank you for highlighting the value of diversity and how important it is to celebrate it, and for giving, strategies that companies can use to foster diversity and inclusivity. And so I'm just going to pass over to our next speaker tonight, which will be Celina Mfuko. So it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. If I can have the slides, please. Thank you so much. So my name is Celina. I'm Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager. My background is a nurse, and I'm also a research manager at St. Bartholomew Hospital in London. So if I can have the next slide, please. I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker so that we can catch up with time. I'm probably not going to read all of it there, but when I'm thinking about the inclusive workplace, what environment we are going to create for people with protected characteristics. And we know we have 9 protected characteristics, but I've just named a few there. To me, it's about that feeling that you're welcome, that you're valued for your contribution, and you've got the same opportunities similar to your co-workers. And that you're empowered to thrive, and that your experience in whatever that you are, whether it's NHS or non-NHS organization, that there is a sense of belonging. And I think I can actually relate to all of the speakers when they were saying things. I was just quite nodding. I mean, Zaza say that shock. I mean, I've been in the UK for over 20 years, and that shock when I trained here as an F in University of Northampton, when you start kind of feeling that you're being treated different because of your color, it's really a shock, because it's like, what is it that I have done wrong? And I can kind of relate to most of the narrative from all of the previous speakers. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is I thought about what do we see, and what is it that kind of maybe we are not choosing to see. So what are the realities of the current situation when you're talking about inclusion? So for example, that iceberg is just an example there, that sometimes you tend to kind of have this feeling in the workplace whereby we're going to focus on what's our vision, what's our strategy for diversity and inclusion, the standard, the goals, the policies, let's look at everything else. But I think there's something below that iceberg that somehow, whether it's uncomfortable, that we are kind of not really deep diving, I would say, into it. What are our norms? What about the tradition, the values, the unwritten rules, our beliefs, our spirituality, the perception? How do we see the other person who do not look like us, that they have got similar potential, that they are as clever as you are to actually thrive, to actually lead and have a seat at the senior tables? So I think right now, most of the conversations, I know I understand what Jeevantika said, that most of the conversation that she's having is about fostering that inclusive workplace. But I think from where my job role is actually most of the conversation is about that, but also at the same time is about having those difficulty conversations, that having that a conversation where I can actually say to people, and some of them are my seniors, about how can we actually being accountable for our action, something about look at the mirror and maybe asking yourself about the practices that actually you are allowing to happen, and things as such. So it is some of these challenges that it is the difficult conversation that I'm currently having. If I can have the next slide, please. Yeah, so as I say, not going to read that slide again, but similarly to what Jeevantika was saying, it's about organization, what practices and process they are in place to break the barriers. What are they doing in terms of providing fair and equitable access to opportunities, the career progression, mentorship, sponsorship. And one thing that we are actually using mostly in NHS is about workforce data. If we're looking at the workforce data, how can this data actually help us to inform our policies, our practices, and what the responsibility, what the capability of our managers, senior leaders, what the culture of an organization, the climate, and the values. And how do we support the staff network or trade unions and things as such. And to me, usually I say it's about the governance and the accountability for everyone, because in one way or another, everyone is a leader where I actually work. And so this is more about how can we foster the environment. Next slide, please. So I've put it there, what do we really like to see? Because if you can look at the first picture, it's like, that's the reality, that's where we are now. But then maybe we can adjust to kind of looking at the equality. No, that's not really fair enough. Okay, what about equity, whereby actually we're looking at individuals and see like, okay, maybe you need a longer stool so that you can see the game. But I think right now people are realizing that, you know what, remove all of these barriers, remove all of these obstacles, and we just want to be liberated. We actually just want to see. So where you remove all the barriers there, then you can actually see you don't need any adjustment, because that level is actually, it is fair for all. If I can have a next slide, please. So I've touched a little bit about the data that usually we are using to actually looking at this workforce race equality data. That's the race workforce disability equality data. We are using the staff survey to ask the staff what do they think their experiences of working in organizations. We use the dashboard, we use a gender pay gap report, and sometimes organization will do quarterly surveys, because this is how we are actually measuring the progress. But actually looking from the past 4 years, the progress, it is very minimal. And I think if I can, what Heidi said before at the beginning is about power. Sometimes you have actually people who really want to hold on to that power, hold on to that privilege. And one of the say that I usually kind of like to use in conversation, I say there's a table there, and if actually they do not give you a seat, please bring your folding chair along. Next slide, please. And this is just, I'll probably would love to leave this, everyone to think actually about this. It's about if you be the change you want to see in the world. For every one of us, because even though sometimes like for myself, I say, I don't want to sit at the back and be a victim. I actually want to show people how would I like the changes to happen, and actually be a part of the changes in the next 10, 20 years. I would like actually, if someone asked me, when the COVID infection actually highlighted all of the inequalities in health, inequalities in police system, in laws, or whatever, where were you? I would like to say, actually, I was a part of a process. I was a part of a movement. I was an activist. I was that angelic troublemakers trying to make changes. Thank you so much, Hannah, for your time.
Thank you so much, Celina. That was just such valuable talk there. I just love listening to that, and thank you. I love your depiction of the iceberg that you used to explain some of the more deeply embedded patterns and ways of thinking that still exist in the workplace. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to pass over to our last speaker of tonight, which is Trisha Webb.
Hello, hi everybody. Hi Hannah. So I think I'm conscious of time, but also I don't have any slides to present, but I just thought I'd talk through my opinions and just talk through my experiences. So I'm currently working within the NHS as a senior manager. And I think when I thought and was asked to sort of speak tonight, I thought, well, I had to think quite deeply about what do I consider to be inclusiveness and what is it for me and what have I experienced. And I think listening to all the wonderful speakers before me and their really informative presentations, I think it does come down to something that I think Celina said and I'd written down before, was the welcoming part. To feel welcomed is a huge part of being inclusive in anything, even when we think about in social situations, you feel included, you feel that sense of inclusiveness just by being welcomed, something as simple as that. And for me, it speaks up ideas of no boundaries, freedom to be yourself. And I think that links into being welcomed, because when you're at your best and when you're at yourself and you're most natural, I think that's when you can feel inclusive, because you're accepted for who you are, not what you are or what you look like. And I think it invoked certain words as well about fairness. And of course, looking at the picture that Celina just showed with regards to the famous wall and equality, that all springs to mind my experience of when I felt included, because being a woman of colour, being born in Britain, having worked across several continents, where I have been probably the only Black woman, maybe on at the board table or in a senior management meeting. I've looked around the room and I'm thinking, there aren't people that look like me, but I am me. And I think in my experience, there's been some good experience of feeling included and some other experiences where actually you can feel very unwelcomed and not feel at the table. So that's what inclusiveness feels to me. And I think there's definitely work on making people feel more included, particularly in the workplace. But why? I mean, I think some of the speakers have already touched on it. There are still feelings of strong exclusion for people in different industries. High-tech industries, we've already talked about law. And interestingly, my sister's a lawyer. And I think from her childhood experience of being told she's a lawyer now, but when she was much younger, she was extremely good at sports, maybe a bit stereotypical, but she was a fantastic sprinter. And she was told very much at school, stick to that. You know, you don't need to worry about the bookwork, the education, stick to the running, you're really good at that, you'll succeed there. Was not encouraged to pick up the books, was not encouraged to further educate herself. And actually now she's a really successful lawyer, and thank God she didn't listen, because our parents would have not let us listen to that, certainly. We were absolutely steeped in education from school. My mother is in education and my father is ex-army. So there was no way that would have been listened to. We were encouraged to do everything, try everything, be the best at everything that we wanted to do. So there is a need for people to feel included. There is a need for more equality. And I think this has already been spoken about tonight, but I do think it is something that I feel very strong and passionate about. It is about getting the best of the best is why inclusivity is needed, particularly in the workplace. Because if we have unconscious bias, if we don't employ people based on their capability, regardless of their race, their gender, their religion, any of those protected characteristics, we are not recruiting the best of the best. We are not working with the best of the best. And therefore, the company can't perform with the best of the best. We can overlook such great talent if we're not inclusive. And the world is becoming more diverse anyway. So naturally, I would consider there to be an opportunity to be more inclusive because of globalization. People are crossing boundaries, crossing continents to work in different organizations and to go and live in different countries and work. So I think it is natural that inclusivity should be something at the forefront of our minds, but also it should and hopefully is happening more naturally. I'm not going to give my age away, But when I was younger, I didn't see colour at all. And having grown up in a very predominant white society, I didn't realise that I actually was black for quite a long time. And it's only when I worked and went back to where my parents come from that I realised, well, actually, there's quite a lot of people who look like me, but I didn't quite see the difference. And it's amazing how when we're younger, we don't see it, but we do get tutored into it as we get older by our experiences. And this is something that hopefully we're able to eradicate as we become more open, as we become more diverse, as globalization becomes widespread. West is meeting the East is meeting the West, and we can learn from each other. And that goes back to the theme of, seeking out to get the best of the best and share good ideas from different people. And that hopefully breeds more inclusivity. But what are the real realities? I mean, I'm probably painting a sort of Pollyanna view of it, but we're not there yet. Of course, we're not there yet. There are definite microaggressions, which we've heard of this evening, and unconscious biases. And, we all can have those. But I think the realities is that people are doing their best, particularly in the workplace. I think the NHS has many initiatives that they're wanting to promote to ensure that we have an inclusive workplace. But there is a lot of work to do. We have our BAME networks, and we certainly have ambassadors now on recruitment panels to encourage diverse applicants, to encourage people to apply for opportunities, whereas there may have been not necessarily encouragement from others to go for them, but also just by putting in an application and people seeing the name on the form, which might look a little bit different, they feel that they're not getting to the next stage. And I have seen that happen. My name is extremely ordinary. It doesn't depict any kind of gender, race necessarily. But certainly I have had experience with colleagues and friends who just by their sheer name, they're better qualified than me. We've gone for the same opportunities. And I somehow managed to have gotten through to the next stage and they haven't. So there is still lots of work to do about that. And I think the environments that we need to foster to encourage inclusivity is to have champions. And I think it's to have those brave conversations, to talk to people generally, and which is what we're doing now, to have that dialogue, to talk about the language that we use, which is unconscious language, which perhaps encourages bias and encourages exclusion. I think that's important to have those brave conversations with friends, with employers, with colleagues, with peers. We need to educate through language. We need to educate through our own voices and our own experiences. And I think through that openness, we should be able to break down those barriers and reduce some of the inequalities that we still see today, even though it is 2021. And I think for me, that's pretty much a summary of the feelings on the topic. And I think I've heard so many good things said this evening about what we can do to foster an environment where inclusivity is. But I think we all have a part to play. We all are accountable for our own actions, not necessarily others, but our own. So I think that's what I would like to say. I totally hear the plea that we have to make people accountable, but we have to be accountable too, to share our experiences and to promote inclusiveness in the workplace and wider afield if that's possible. So for me, I don't have a fancy slogan or a motto or a sort of an inspiring thing to say, but I know through my experience of working with people as a life coach, my motto is always dream it, design it, and do it. So we need to dream of what we can see for the future, be it for yourself, for your families, for your children, for your peers. Make a plan of how you can make that happen and enact on that plan. And I think if we all did something different today, we can all make a difference. Thank you. So I think that's me summing up my views.
Thank you, Trisha. Thanks so much for all of that. It's just really great to hear from you. And thank you for really emphasising what genuine inclusion and welcome feels like. And yeah, I love what you said about inclusivity, about how it's important even to get the best, and how, the different complexities that there are in the workplace. So I think I might start off a short Q&A just by asking the panelists whether any of you had any questions for each other about anything that's been said tonight. I know there's been so many amazing things said tonight.
I think I had one question. Sorry, I think there's a hands up on the system, but I couldn't find it. But I think it was with regards to Jeevantika in the IT industry. I was really interested. I think I've got it right, that working for Microsoft and that world, which is extremely male dominated, how do you feel that you're making a difference in your role?
Jeevantika's had to leave.
Oh, she left at 7,
yeah.
didn't she?
Yeah.
Oh, it's 8 minutes past 7. All right, I went over the time.
No, that's fine. Does anyone have any other questions for the remaining panelists based on what was shared tonight? If not, that's fine. We have some questions from the floor I can ask. So we had a question. It's more of a general one based on inclusivity. So I'll open this up to all of our panelists. What are some of the elements you would expect to see in an inclusive workplace?
I'll probably just kick on answering that. To me, it's more about that my voice will be counted. My views will be taken seriously, and not just every views, at least being listened to, because sometimes you're walking into the room and before you've even started to speak, you can feel it that that the environment is not accepting for who you are. You cannot hide your color. And sometimes you're speaking on the phone, or like an example, probably I will use an example that I was used before. Sometimes I've been working on the ward, and you even, the colleague will come in, and this will be a white colleague, and will look at you and says, oh, who is in charge today? And you'll say, I'm in charge. And you have that kind of drawn back, as in, yeah, they may be expecting someone else to be in charge. So just that kind of feeling that you belong, your views are taken seriously, that to me, it's really valuable. And the more you are actually, if you are working in an environment where you feel you belong, Hannah, you give a lot. You give a lot willingly, because the environment has accepted you. And this is where you're actually accepting responsibility more than what you actually, yeah. So you give a lot when you have that sense of belonging. And I just think that the employers are missing out if actually they're not creating this environment, because otherwise people say, you know what, I'm only contracted for 30 hours, I'm going to work 30 hours, I'm giving you nothing extra. Whereby when people feel they belong, they actually go extra mile. And that is the extra mile that some employers are missing out.
Absolutely, I think I would agree with that, Celina. I think there is so much out there in diversity alone for people to give, and I think people can miss that. And I think it is still takes me aback when you walk into the room and people go, you know, who's Trisha Webbe, the assistant director, and you go, well, actually that's me. And it still happens. My sister's had that experience as a lawyer walking into court, and the clerk has looked at her and thought that she's not the solicitor, that it's somebody else. And they've been looking for that person. She said, well, actually, it's me. So again, there is still those biases which we need barriers to break down. So absolutely that openness and that honesty to say that actually, to call it out and say that, you know, we are in 2021 here. And actually, we need to recognise that that has to be eradicated, and inclusivity is as subtle as that. It's just, you know, not seeing that colour, not seeing that face, and treating people as they are, which we're all the human race. We are all humans, and we need to see beyond what we see, isn't it, in terms of that.
I think I would like to add that I think we will have achieved diversity and inclusion when people who are different, many of the panelists today, I'm sure will agree, don't have to work 150% to be able to reach leadership. So I think that will be the sign that we really have made a difference, that we'll just give the same effort to be able to reach the top. So that would be my view.
Can I speak now? Yeah. Hi. Yes, I've been working for over 40 years in universities, and new universities, elite universities, American universities, all over the world. And I have never really been in an inclusive workspace that I can name and say that I have felt valued and treated equally, or even listened to. And you might find that ironic because I am a senior person. I've been in leadership positions, but I haven't felt the you know. So I haven't felt that I have position of power, even though I might be in leadership. I haven't felt able to change that workspace. Maybe my teams that I direct research teams, and I would choose people that I felt I could work with and make those spaces of belonging. So they are sort of microcosms in a big institution. So I can create spaces where I mentor people, where we treat each other fairly and equally. We are open, we have dialogue, as you were saying, Zara, communicating properly and decently and with respect. But that happens in small microcosms. And then what I tend to have done is actually replicate what white institutions do. I choose people like me to work with, young women of color, young men of color, people with, queer, a whole range of people that I feel comfortable with. And when I have worked with white colleagues who have worked for me, there has always been grievances and problems and issues to accept my position of leadership. So what would be the elements? The question was, some of the elements that you expect to see in an inclusive workplace. Everyone has explained that it will be a place of belonging, a place of respect, a place where you're listened to. But I think that that has to come from those in power. They have to respect you and acknowledge you and your talents. And one of the things that I have found is that one of the most divisive things in the workplace, and I know maybe I'm sounding negative rather than positive, but it's the reality, is that this idea of talent and ability and merit is very divisive, because what is talent? Is Boris the most talented person? Not necessarily. Are some of our leaders, the best at their jobs? Many of them are very mediocre. And there's a lot of nepotism. By that I mean, favoritism. Just as I was saying, I choose people that look like me in order to protect my work environment. So do they, and it isn't always that the best rises to the top, so that people of color with talent don't actually get into those workplaces. So I would say what we do need is places that can see talent for what it is, and what we've been doing is, in some research, is sort of blind interviews. By that, no names, no no age. Well, of course, that's part of the legislation. Not, no gender, no way in which they can know any of those aspects of your protected characteristics when you apply for the job. So your qualifications speak for themselves, and that we need on the recruitment boards a range of people who will appreciate that talent, and it doesn't come with any of the cultural, biases that are there. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Heidi. And you've just had one really interesting question, if you could just maybe have a really quick answer to. It is, how can we see the lack of diversity in workplaces as a wider social issue rather than solely a BAME issue?
Can I answer that again? Sorry, as no one else is jumping in. It's an ironic situation because again, this research that I'm doing with the Institute of Fiscal Studies at the moment, where we're looking at the effects of COVID, and we're looking at on minority ethnic communities, and we're also looking at projecting into the future and seeing what the population growth would look like in the next 30 to 50 years. And Britain, as the Western European white settler world, will be more than a third and growing Black and minority ethnic. Latina in America, Pakistanis are the fastest growing group in Britain. Across Europe, we have migrants, coming from the global south to do with the aftermath of colonialism and war and famine, and there's so many huge global forces of migration that's going to change the population. So this embattled sense of that we have in these white institutions, has to shift by sheer numbers and representation, because at the moment, like I was the first woman of color to be a professor. I would be the one in a million, the only one in the department. Like Celina was saying, you walk into a room, they ask you for a cup of coffee, but you're there to sit on the panel. And we can all say that, but I think that's about to shift, because we are now there and going to come in far greater numbers. And also in terms of gender, women are going to be, in the next 50 years, or even before that, the main consumers. They're going to be spending money. People, they're the ones going to be, registering with Sky and Amazon, and so these big multinationals have got to sit up and think about gender issues and diversity issues just by sheer force.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much. I think we will end it there unless anyone has any final comments. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists tonight. I think this has just been a really insightful, valuable discussion we've had tonight. And I really hope that all of our viewers have been able to take on a lot of what's been said and learn something new, and being able to understand different perspectives coming from different workplaces across different sectors. So it's just been a really interesting discussion tonight. And so thank you very much for all of our panelists joining, and good evening.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening.
Thanks a lot.